again to Animal Farm. Today's part is part 8, and we're going to continue reading chapter 5. We did about one page in chapter 5 so far. That dealt with Mollie mostly. Mollie is the self-absorbed, foolish white mare, meaning white female horse, that already was privileged before the revolution, right? She was privileged. She was treated better than the other animals because Mr. Jones only used her like on the weekends, maybe to pull his little cart into town once or twice a week, right? Um, and of course, and also people admired her for being beautiful, right? And she would get sugar, and she would be brushed, and she would be properly manicured, right? And all of these things have now disappeared, and so I'll send you this also. Maybe I will have done it already. About Mollie being basically part of the upper classes, because yeah, they didn't have many problems in the first place, right? And now all the things they enjoyed in the past, such as good food and the respect of the lower classes and leisure time, um, and yeah, being involved with themselves mostly. All of these things have now gone away or are threatened to go away, and so Mollie becomes a deserter. She leaves and is never seen again. Well, that's not true. They see her again, but she doesn't come back to the farm. Yeah, so that's about Mollie. There will be a little bit reading about that, I believe. But so now, moving on, and so yeah, the political system of the animals has already changed in that the pigs are now accepted as being so much smarter than everybody else, so that they just make all the decisions among themselves, and then the other animals only get to ratify them. We wrote that down last week, to ratify. So ratify is just vote on and make legal, make accepted. Yeah, legal, right? Make it legal. So they have given away much of their rights already, because they just never could make up their mind about anything themselves, right? That's also maybe shown by Snowball's committees. Yes, he wants everybody to become educated, but most of the animals don't have the ability or simply aren't interested. In the committees too, right? He wants to put them into little committees where they all can voice their opinion in their own field of expertise, but most of these committees come to nothing because they don't have any opinions, or they're simply not interested. So anyway, now we are moving on. I hope today's part can be a little bit shorter. So again, in January there came bitterly hard weather. The earth was like iron, and nothing could be done in the fields. Many meetings were held in the big barn, and the pigs occupied themselves with planning out the work of the coming season. It had come to be accepted that the pigs, who were manifestly cleverer than the other animals, should decide all questions of farm policy, though their decisions had to be ratified by a majority vote. This arrangement would have worked well enough if it had not been for the disputes between Snowball and Napoleon. These two disagreed at every point where disagreement was possible. If one of them suggested sowing a bigger acreage with barley, the other was certain to demand a bigger acreage of oats. And if one of them said that such and such a field was just right for cabbages, the other would declare that it was useless for anything except roots. Each had his own following. There were some violent debates. At the meetings, Snowball often won over the majority by his brilliant speeches, but Napoleon was better at canvassing support for himself in between times. He was especially successful with the sheep. Of late, the sheep had taken to bleating 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, both in and out of of season, and they often interrupted the meetings with this. It was noticed that they were especially liable to break into four legs go, two legs bad at crucial moments in Snowball's speeches. Okay. So the animals aren't super concerned about giving away their rights to make resolutions themselves. The pigs are so much cleverer, and nothing bad has happened. So okay, no big deal for them to them for now. But one problem is there's constant and lasting. Well, there's disputes between Napoleon and Snowball. And so dispute is a lasting disagreement, right? That you want to fight it out, right? You said, no, unacceptable. Nobody can leave until this is finished, right? That'd be a dispute. Could also be like a law case, right? That'd be a dispute. It has to be lasting somehow. And one example is that maybe one of them would argue for a bigger acreage of oats, and the other one would say, "Pah! I want a bigger acreage of barley instead." So those are wheat, no, not wheat, grains that animals might like. Oats, yeah, people eat oats too, but you have to like crush them and pre-steam them. Otherwise, they take a long time to be useful, to be soft enough to eat. And even then, yeah, they make cereal and stuff. Even then, they're not super widely used. But so acreage is used here as singular only, always singular, right? Acreage is not really a thing. And also only without any numbers. So it says here, bigger acreage. Once you talk, once you want to put a number, well then just use the count noun acre, such as 7 acres or 3 acres or 2.5 acres of land, right? And I said before, I believe, how much an acre is, or at least I described it, because 1 acre is the amount of farmland that one person can plow in a day by himself. Yeah, so they too argue the fields like that, right? They said, yeah, I should have more barley. No, says the other one. No. More oats. Or this field is great for cabbages. And the other one would say, pah, it's not good for anything except roots. And so they would argue. These are the examples here. And Snowball is the better speaker. This has come out by now. Snowball is a far better speaker, so he wins often the support in the meetings. But Napoleon is better at canvassing support between times. Later on, this gets called tactics. Not in this part yet, but later on, someone starts calling this tactics. But really, yeah, it's, well, we'll get to it. Yeah, and he's especially successful with the sheep. As we have established, the sheep are the most basic people, right? They're always a group. They have no distinguishing features in between each other. They don't even have names. We've seen that at the Battle of the Cowshed. One sheep died. Well, she didn't have a name or anything. She did get a medal, but never gets mentioned again. The sheep are the most basic people. One could even say the sheep are now the symbol of mob rule. So, because during the meetings, they now start shouting, bleating, as because they're sheep. But so they now start shouting, 4 legs bad, 2 no, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and that is pretty much meaningless because they're all animals, right? What are you supposed to communicate here? But they're only using this motto. What is it? Maxim, right? The maxim to shout down Snowball during crucial moments of his speeches. So the very important, maybe finishing moments of a speech, the sheep would start shouting him down with this meaningless maxim, meaningless motto. And that, yeah, we can already see, this seems to be Napoleon's tactics, because he's very good at canvassing support between meetings, right? Getting support while no meetings are being held, right? While maybe everyone should really just focus on their work, but Napoleon gets to scheme behind the scenes, right? And and the last thing is, the sheep have started bleating, so shouting this, in and out of season, means all the bloody time. Okay, moving on. So that's a problem a little bit. The animals find that too. These long-lasting disputes are not popular and really endanger the system. Oh, I wonder if that's going to get any worse. Let's move on. Snowball has lots of plans for the farm. Some of it will be described to us now. Snowball had made a close study of some back numbers of the farmer and stock breeder, which he had found in the farmhouse, and was full of plans for innovations and improvements. He talked learnedly about field drains, silage, and basic slag, and had worked out a complicated scheme for all the animals to drop their dung directly into the fields at a different spot every day to save the labor of cartage. Napoleon produced no schemes of his own, but said quietly that Snowballs would come to nothing and seemed to be biding his time. But of all their controversies, none was so bitter as the one that took place over the windmill. And that's already all for this part. It's a very short part because of vocabulary. So, Snowball is very much an intellectual now, right? He reads a lot, and he's has many ideas about innovations and improvements, and that's very much in the style, in the air of the early 20th century, right? There's so much innovation that happens so quickly. Also in Soviet Russia, they were very backwards to begin with, right? They are mostly an agricultural society, right? All that empty countryside. Well, it's not empty; it has people on it, but they are not really doing anything different that they haven't done in the last 250 years. Um, and there's so much potential, right? And also, if you want to create a classless society, as Marxism would suggest, would demand, right? Then yeah, sure, the people who live in the countryside, they also want to have things like running water, electricity, more leisure time, maybe. Well, surely. And so yeah, in the early 20th century, there was much air of innovations and improvements, and Snowball has learned quite a bit from back numbers, being older issues of a magazine. Sometimes you see that as back issues that maybe you can still buy. You can like order it from the magazine publisher. Oh yeah, sure, we have old issues. If you want them, we're still selling them. Back numbers, back issues of the farmer and stock breeder. Stock, that's livestock, right? So animals that you keep, that you breed for sale, right? Or for use. In maybe America, you would call that a rancher, so somebody who has a ranch. Or if it's not cows or pigs, maybe still it could be a stockman, somebody who raises animals. So, and there in this magazine, he learns a lot about drains, so where the water management, right? Draining the fields after rain, and also using less water. Drains, silage, slag, and dung. Easy enough. Dung is animal poop, manure again, right? And in fact, he has worked out a clever system where the animals go to a different place every day to drop their poop. This way, they would be saving the labor of cartage. Cartage being, well, carts, right? You don't have to spend time and energy on carting things around, be that manure, if you like, or anything else. The animals could just go to different places in the fields and drop their droppings, then there wouldn't be any need for cartage, saving the labor of cartage. Okay, that's a good idea, really, because they can easily do that. Slag is waste material. That's not super important here. Silage, that would be good for them because that's about hay again. Uh, that So hay, they needed to dry it, right, and then keep it very dry so that they can use it in winter and feed it to all the animals. But somebody worked out, well, you don't have to dry everything. With the right conditions, the right kind of bacteria, the grass could be tied up and kept without drying, and animals could still eat it. It would be fermented, right? Bacteria would change the grass, but as long as the animals could still eat it, it wouldn't matter, right? And that's silage. Yeah, and drains, I already said, it's about draining water. So it's all very scientific about yeah, farm operations, right? But it's a symbol of 20th century, early 20th century scientific advantages, right? And one of the big things he's thinking about is a windmill. So that is now the biggest controversy that Snowball and Napoleon have. Snowball has the idea of a windmill, and Napoleon has no ideas. Napoleon seems to, he's talking very quietly, which he doesn't normally do about it, which he doesn't normally do, saying it's bad, it's not going to work, but seemingly he's just biding his time, waiting for his moment to come. That's that. It's a phrase, right? Biding his time. Oh, so let's hear it about the windmill then. But of all their controversies, none was so bitter as the one that took place over the windmill. In the long pasture, not far from the farm buildings, there was a small knoll, which was the highest point on the farm. After surveying the ground, Snowball declared that this was just the place for a windmill, which could be made to operate a dynamo and would supply the farm with electrical power. This would light the stalls, warm them in winter, and would also run a circular saw, a chaff cutter, a mango slicer, and an electric milking machine. The animals had never heard of anything of this kind before, for the farm was an old-fashioned one and had only the most primitive machinery, and they listened in astonishment while Snowball conjured up pictures of fantastic machines which would do their work for them while they grazed at their ease in the fields or improved their minds with reading and conversation. Short parts today, you see, because of vocabulary. So, seemingly, this is the same knoll we've heard already about in maybe chapter 2 or 3. The animals run to this knoll in chapter 2 or 3 to yeah, also survey everything. Is it survey or survey? Survey everything because it's the highest point on the farm. So here, right? They come here to survey, and Snowball also came here and surveyed the ground carefully and said, "Aha, this is just the right place for a windmill." Why do they need a windmill? Do they wanna grind corn or wheat to bake bread? No. It's an electric windmill. It would run a dynamo, and a dynamo is a thing that creates electricity, right? And then what can they do with electricity? Well, the electricity would light the stalls where they sleep, warm them in winter. They could also run a circular saw. So a circular saw is this, right? Circular is that it's a disc. And it's very, very good for cutting logs to make, well, boards. And boards you need for everything. So it's a very important piece of industry, right? And once you, well, it's not even particularly hard to build, right? You just need to have a lot of planning, a good place where you can have the power and also the trees and also the labor and also, again, maybe cartage to move it all come together in one place. So a circular saw, a chaff cutter, we heard of this before. The animals had problems with the corn in the past, that they had to tread it with their feet and then blow away the chaffs with their breath. Well, now they would like a machine that could cut the corn kernels away from the rest. A mangle slicer. Mangles are roots. We also have heard that before. That's something they also eat. Don't know. And a milking machine. Again, we already know that the cows always need milking and the pigs can do it, but it's certainly not easy. And the animals had never heard of such things because the farm is an old-fashioned one and only has the most primitive machinery. The book actually says machinery. So the machines all have to be powered by animals, pretty much, right? By the cart horses pulling them, or maybe some other machines. You also the machine stays in place, but a horse has to walk around to create the power for those. And they only have simple machines, right? Such as there's no chaff cutter on this farm. So you would maybe have to dry your corn, your ears of corn, well, and then sell them or give them away to have them separated. But maybe you just sell the whole thing for less money, right? And so the animals listen in astonishment. Oh, amazing! In astonishment as Snowball conjures up, creates pictures for them of the luxury of electricity, right? Of all the stuff they could do if they had electricity. They wouldn't have to be cold. They wouldn't have to do things, well, by hand like this, right? Where they had to do it, well, by hand. And instead, they could graze in the fields at their leisure, which is what horses and cows and goats and sheep want to do, right? They would love to just stand around all day and graze, eat grass, and some others maybe too, right? Well, chickens don't graze, but they scratch the ground for food, right? So they could just graze all day, or advance their minds. What does it say? Where? Or improve their minds with reading and conversation. Well, the horses and the cows are certainly not interested in that. But hey, standing around all day grazing, that sounds great. And that's Snowball's grand plan about a windmill. Moving on, and he's serious too. We'll get to that now. Within a few weeks, Snowball's plans for the windmill were fully worked out. The mechanical details came mostly from 3 books which had belonged to Mr. Jones. 1,000 useful things to do about the house, every man his own bricklayer, and electricity for beginners. Snowball used as his study a shed which had once been used for incubators and had a smooth wooden floor suitable for drawing on. He was closeted there for hours at a time, with his books held open by a stone, and with a piece of chalk gripped between the knuckles of his trotter. He would move rapidly to and fro, drawing in line after line and uttering little whimpers of excitement. um, Gradually, the plans grew into a complicated mass of cranks and cogwheels covering more than half the floor, which, which which the other animals found completely unintelligible but very impressive. So, as I said, Snowball is serious about it, and he works out the plans fairly quickly. First of all, he uses as his study. So a study is really just a room for studying, right? Nowadays, you would maybe call that a home office, but that's really not the same, I suppose, right? A home office suggests that it's some kind of business you're doing. Um, a study is really just for studying, maybe for just for your enjoyment, right, or for science, or um, it's maybe right next door to your personal library, so that you can always go to the library, pick the right book, right, dust it off, and then carry it to the study where now you spend hours considering it and reading it. And he does too. He is closeted, like a closet, locked in, right? Closeted in the study for hours at a time, and he has chalk between his trotter because pigs' feet, they only have two nails, right? So there's only one gap in between, and there he holds his chalk and he runs to and fro and puts all the lines. And the shed was in the past used for incubators. So that's when you put eggs under a heat lamp, right? It needs to be nice and clean, needs to be nice and safe so that the eggs hatch into well, ducklings or geese, baby geese, right? Or baby or chicks or whatever you're incubating. And so the idea here, and it has these like red lamps, right? Infrared lamps. And so the idea here that it's very much like a laboratory. The floor is very smooth and clean, and that's where he does his drawing. Okay, and he gets all his knowledge from three books. Those books belonged to Mr. Jones, and they are a bit of a plot device, right? Whenever the pigs don't know anything or can't know that, well, there's always a book that Mr. Jones had lying around, or even threw out, and that's how the pigs got the knowledge. Okay, that's 1,000 useful things to do about the house. Every man his own bricklayer. Bricklayer is to make walls with bricks, right? Because again, the pigs have no idea how to build walls or anything about architecture, but they get it from this book. He gets it from this book. And electricity for beginners. How useful. And after a short time, the whole, well, like half of the floor is covered with his drawings, and it's a mass, in fact, an unintelligible, very difficult to understand, right? Can't understand, can't read. A complicated mass of cranks and cogwheels. So a cogwheel is this, right? A wheel with teeth to drive, well, other wheels basically, or some kind of machinery at least at some end, right? And cranks, well, are these connecting rods in between, right? They spin too, and they get to connect it to other things, right? And so that's a crank. And the other animals have no idea about this. This is very unintelligible to them, but nevertheless very impressive. Maybe that is a hint of futurism, being that in the 20th century, well, pretty much all throughout, but especially in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, also in the 1910s, right? Everybody was super excited about the future, right? Electricity especially made dreams come true for people, right? Steam power also, but especially electricity made people's imaginations run wild. What could be possible, right? And yeah, not much longer, in the 1950s, right? The space race starts. between Russia and America, and well, the whole world really wants to join in, but doesn't have the power maybe. But everybody's interested in the space race, and 50 years, 30 years before that, this would have been magic to people, right? Leaving the planet, going to the moon, well, that's crazy talk. But so, our own little study of this here is that Snowball wants to bring electricity to the farm, and he's serious too. Meanwhile, Napoleon is not impressed because he doesn't have any ideas like that. This is already Snowball's second good idea, right? The first good idea was about the animal droppings, saving labor and easy enough to implement, and also, yeah, showing that Snowball is very educated about all this, right? Yeah, dung, slag, which is waste, and drains, so about water management, and what was the other one? Oh, and silage, so about storing food. Snowball shows that he's very, very intelligent, and Napoleon is not happy about that. Moving on. So the other animals found the drawings completely unintelligible but very impressive. All of them came to look at Snowball's drawings at least once a day. Even the hens and ducks came and were at pains not to tread on the chalk marks. Only Napoleon held aloof. He had declared himself against the windmill from the start. One day, however, he arrived unexpectedly to examine the plans. He walked heavily round the shed, looked closely at every detail of the plans, and snuffed at them once or twice, then stood for a while contemplating them out of the corner of his eye. Then suddenly he lifted his leg, urinated over the plants, and walked out without uttering a word. Ha! Oof! So that is where we shall stop today, because, yeah, so to speak, well, right? Napoleon comes to visit before he had held himself aloof, meaning being distant and uninterested, or at least pretending to be, right? Yeah, I suppose you could be aloof but not really. Hold yourself. Pretend that you are not interested but you are. So one day, Napoleon too comes to visit, and he looks at everything, maybe with disdain, because he walks around heavily. The other animals, the ducks and the hens, they were at pains, it says, not to step on the chalk marks. But not Napoleon. He steps around heavily, yeah, with arrogance, yeah. And he snuffed at them sometimes. Snuff, right? Yeah, like sniff, right? But maybe more like breathe out. Again, maybe showing contempt. Showing contempt for something. Means having no respect, right? Showing that you're displeased, that you're not pleased with that. Snuffed at them, but yet he stands there and contemplates what he just saw. In fact, he does it out of the corner of his eyes, again, maybe trying to pretend he's not interested, but then makes a decision, and it's a very uncivilized decision, probably marking a change in the Napoleon Snowball relationship. Right now, the gloves are off. No more polite, politically motivated, careful conversation. No, 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 no. A new round of the game has started because he pees onto the drawings. That's urinate, right? He urinates onto the drawings and then leaves without uttering a word. To utter is to speak. But he leaves without saying anything, and that is dun 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 dun, a dramatic moment in the Snowball-Napoleon relationship. And yeah, as I've said, right, a page has been turned. The gloves are now off. I think those are boxing gloves maybe, because um, the boxing gloves really are protecting the boxers, right, from tearing each other's skin open, right, and all the blood going everywhere. The boxing gloves are making your fists softer. You could still knock people out, but not as easily, and so that's the gloves are coming off. Shoot. The gloves are off now. Or maybe it's not boxing gloves. Maybe it's just normal gloves that people wore in the past, right? As people of class and higher society. But if you want to fight somebody, well, you will take them off, right? And put them in your pocket and say, well, 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 buddy, it has come to this. And this is too happening here in the, as I now have said many times, Snowball-Napoleon relationship. And this is where we shall stop today. And I'll read it to you one more time. Of course. In January there came bitterly hard weather. The earth was like iron, and nothing could be done in the fields. Many meetings were held in the big barn, and the pigs occupied themselves with planning out the work of the coming season. It had come to be accepted that the pigs, who were manifestly cleverer than the other animals, should decide all questions of farm policy, though their decisions had to be ratified by a majority vote. This arrangement would have worked well enough if it had not been for the disputes between Snowball and Napoleon. These two disagreed at every point where disagreement was possible. If one of them suggested sowing a bigger acreage with barley, the other was certain to demand a bigger acreage of oats. And if one of them said that such and such a field was just right for cabbages, the other would declare that it was useless for anything except roots. Each had his own following. There were some violent debates. At the meetings, Snowball often won over the majority by his brilliant speeches, but Napoleon was better at canvassing support for himself in between times. He was especially successful with the sheep. Of late, the sheep had taken to bleating for bad, both in and out of season, and they often interrupted the meetings with this. It was noticed that they were especially liable to break into bad at crucial moments in Snowball's speeches. Snowball had made a close study of some back numbers of The Farmer and Stockbreeder, which he had found in the farmhouse, and was full of plans for innovations and improvements. He talked learnedly about field drains, silage, and basic slack, and had worked out a complicated scheme for all the animals to drop their dung directly in the fields at a different spot every day to save the labor of cartage. Napoleon produced no schemes of his own, but said quietly that Snowballs would come to nothing and seemed to be biding his time. But of all their controversies, none was so bitter as the one that took place over the windmill. In the long pasture, not far from the farm buildings, there was a small knoll which was the highest point on the farm. After surveying the ground, Snowball declared that this was just the place for a windmill, which could be made to operate a dynamo and supply the farm with electrical power. This would light the stalls and warm them in winter, and would also run a circular saw, a chaff cutter, a mango slicer, and an electric milking machine. The animals had never heard of anything of this kind before, for the farm was an old-fashioned one and had only the most primitive machinery. And they listened in astonishment while Snowball conjured up pictures of fantastic machines which would do their work for them while they grazed at their ease in the fields or improved their minds with reading and conversation. Within a few weeks, Snowball's plans for the windmill were fully worked out. The mechanical details came mostly from 3 books which had belonged to Mr. Jones. 1,000 useful things to do about the house, Every man his own bricklayer, and Electricity for Beginners. Snowball used as his study a shed which had once been used for incubators and had a smooth wooden floor suitable for drawing on. He was closeted there for hours at a time, with his books held open by a stone, and with a piece of chalk gripped between the knuckles of his trotter. He would move rapidly to and fro, drawing in line after line, and uttering little whimpers of excitement. Gradually, the plans grew into a complicated mass of cranks and cogwheels, covering more than half the floor, which the other animals found completely unintelligible but very impressive. All of them came to look at Snowball's drawings at least once a day. Even the hens and ducks came and were at pains not to tread on the chalk marks. Only Napoleon held aloof. He had declared himself against the windmill from the start. One day, however, he arrived unexpectedly to examine the plans. He walked heavily round the shed, looked closely at every detail of the plans, and snuffed at them once or twice, then stood for a little while contemplating them out of the corner of his eye. Then suddenly he lifted his leg, urinated over the plans, and walked out without uttering a word. Dun 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 dun. That is it for today. Yeah, Napoleon is not a stupid pig, right? Napoleon is one of the smarter pigs, certainly, but he's a very different kind of thinker, right? I've said before, Napoleon is a practical thinker. He wants to dish out food because that's the most important thing at the time. He later continues with this, making food one of his key policies, right? Because he is practical enough to see food is popular. Also, food is not only food, food is power. If you have more food than you need, you can trade it, right? If you control people's food, that is power again, right? Also, for farmers, food is respect, right? If you have food, then you have success, and success brings you respect of the people, well, the entities around you, right? Napoleon is a practical thinker. He only thinks about the power dynamic. Here too, he looks at it and says, yes, it is good, and that's a problem for me. Because it's not my idea, right? In fact, this is all Snowball. Snowball is so highly respected for his intelligence and his great ideas. The plans are good, and that is bad for me, and things that are bad for me are a problem. So Napoleon is intelligent in a brutish, strongman kind of fashion. Just like his real-world counterpart, Napoleon is a strongman kind of person, right? He only thinks about power dynamics because, right? Well, why is that? Because might is right, eh? If you have power, you can do what you want. If you don't, well, then it doesn't matter what you do because you don't have power. Might is right. All right. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed that, right? Do your homework, wash your hands. Goodbye.